The metallic taste of blood spread through my mouth as I watched the hardened face of my son, Michael. His eyes used to look so much like his father's, but now they shone with a coldness I never imagined seeing directed at me. The punch had been fast and precise, as if he had been holding back that gesture for years. At 67 years old, with trembling hands touching my split lip, I understood that this was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a gradual process of contempt that I had ignored for too long. My name is Emily Carter. For 42 years, I taught literature at the State College, forming generations of young people in the analysis of great works where family betrayal was just a dramatic element of fiction. How ironic it is to become the protagonist of a story that I could well have analyzed with my students in class. That Sunday afternoon will remain etched in my memory with painful clarity. The sky looked especially blue, almost mocking what would happen under its mantle. The knocks on my door were firm and impatient. Upon opening, I found Michael with his wife, Linda, a few steps behind. Without waiting for an invitation, they entered the apartment that has been my home since I was widowed 11 years ago. "We are coming to take you to dinner at the Highland Stag," announced Michael while inspecting my living room with that evaluating look he had developed since he married Linda. It was not an invitation, it was an order barely disguised as a filial gesture. The Highland Stag is an exclusive restaurant with a privileged view of the lake, where the cheapest table costs what I used to spend monthly on my medications, a place where they would exhibit the elderly mother to their business contacts, tangible proof of their supposed family devotion. "Give me a few minutes to change," I replied, trying to maintain the dignity that I felt vanishing with each of their visits. As I headed towards my room, I heard Linda's poorly disguised whisper, "She is getting slower every time. We need to speed up the paperwork for the apartment." My heart shrank, but I kept walking as if I had heard nothing. For months they had been pressuring me to sell my condo in the Lakeview building, arguing concern for my safety, for the stairs I had to climb when the elevator failed, for how big it was for a single person. The real reason shone in their eyes when they mentioned more sensible investments for the sale money. In my bedroom, I opened the closet looking for something appropriate for this imposed dinner. My fingers, now marked by the arthritis that Michael considered an exaggeration to get attention, ran through the few elegant garments I kept. I chose a navy blue dress that my late husband Frank always praised. From the jewelry box, I extracted the silver brooch that my students gave me when I retired, small gestures of silent resistance. Upon returning to the living room, I found Linda examining my library, the one I built lovingly over decades. "These old books take up too much space," she commented without looking at me. "When you move to the new apartment, you could donate them. Nobody reads these old things anymore." Each word was a small wound. Those old books contained underlines of my reflections, dedications from colleagues' notes, for classes I had taught with passion. They were the physical extension of my mind, of my heart. Michael reviewed my appearance with that critical gesture he had perfected. "Are you going to wear that? You look like an old farm wife." I took a deep breath, remembering my students when I explained to them that the most complex characters in literature are those who contain their emotions until the precise moment. "It is the most suitable thing I have for a formal dinner," I replied with a calm I did not feel. It was then that I noticed that Linda had moved from the books to my display cabinet, where I kept the few pieces of crystal inherited from my grandmother Susan. Her fingers with scarlet nails ran across the surfaces as if calculating their value in some market. "This must be worth a fortune," she commented without hiding her greed. "They are family memories," I replied, feeling a pang, seeing how she roughly handled a small crystal figure. "They have sentimental value." Michael closed his hand around his phone with force, a gesture I had learned to recognize as a prelude to his frustration. "Sentiment does not pay bills, Mom. Have you thought about those documents we showed you, the ones for the sale of the apartment?" There was the true reason for the visit, barely disguised as a dinner invitation. In the last few weeks, the pressure had increased exponentially. Documents, brochures for safer residences, constant calls from a real estate agent I had never hired. "I am still considering it, son," I replied, taking my small purse. "It is not a simple decision after living here for so many years." Something changed in his face. The mask of a concerned son slipped, revealing what lay beneath. He approached quickly, invading my personal space with a silent violence that preceded the physical act. I felt his breathing the smell of cigarettes. He swore he had given up the expensive cologne that Linda had given him for his birthday. "Are you going senile or just stubborn?" he hissed between his teeth. "Did we already discuss this? It is not safe for you to live alone." "I have a whole life built here, Michael," I tried to explain. "My friends live nearby. The community center where I volunteer is 2 blocks away. My doctors know my history." I could not finish. The movement was so fast that I barely registered his hand rising. I only felt the brutal impact of his knuckles against my lips, the sharp pain expanding like waves in water, the unmistakable taste of blood. I stumbled back, looking for support on the wall so as not to fall. The physical pain was intense, but the emotional shock was overwhelming. My own son, the baby I had rocked for entire nights, the boy whose scrapes I had cured with kisses, had just hit me deliberately. "Now you are going to eat less, you useless old woman," he shouted while I brought my hand to my mouth, incredulous at what had just happened. But what followed was perhaps even more painful: Linda's laughter. A high, cruel sound that resonated in my living room like an additional dagger. She did not even try to hide the pleasure my humiliation caused her. "You are exaggerating, Michael," she said between laughs. "But maybe that way she will understand once and for all." With trembling legs, I went to the bathroom to assess the damage. The mirror returned an image I would take time to forget. My split lower lip, a thread of blood descending down my chin, and in my eyes, something I had not seen in decades. It was not just pain or fear. It was absolute clarity, as if all the small aggressions of the last few years finally formed a complete picture that I could no longer ignore. While I carefully cleaned the blood with a damp towel, I mentally reviewed the last few years, the derogatory comments disguised as jokes, the documents they tried to make me sign. The friends gradually pushed away the monitored calls, the surprise visits that seemed like inspections. Everything was part of a gradual strategy to isolate me, control me, reduce me to a source of resources for their ambitions. I applied ice wrapped in another towel over my throbbing lip, trying to reduce the inflammation that was already beginning to manifest. "Mom, we are running late," shouted Michael from the living room, as if nothing had happened, as if the blow was just an irrelevant parenthesis in our family dynamic. I recomposed my appearance as best I could, covering the mark of the blow with foundation makeup I kept for special occasions. My face in the mirror showed a different woman from the respected professor I was for decades. I stared at myself, recognizing in my eyes a determination I thought lost in some corner of my youth. "This ends today," I said to myself in a barely audible whisper, while giving the last touch to my swollen lip. I returned to the living room with a serenity that disconcerted Michael. Perhaps he expected tears, pleas, or even for me to refuse to accompany them after what happened. His expression of surprise seeing me ready to go out with my dignity intact was worth every second of the throbbing pain in my mouth. "I am ready," I announced, with a firm voice, taking my coat from the rack by the door. The ride in Michael's car passed in a dense silence, interrupted occasionally by Linda's trivial comments about the weather or traffic. From the back seat, I watched the back of my son's neck, wondering at what moment the sensitive boy who read stories with passion transformed into this man capable of hitting his own mother. It was gradual. There were signs I ignored, concentrated on my teaching work, or was it Linda with her excessive ambitions who awakened this dark facet in him? The Highland Stag restaurant stood imposing in front of the lake, its windows reflecting the last lights of the sunset, an exclusive establishment where the high society of the city exhibited their purchasing power between glasses of very expensive wine and superficial conversations. As the valet took the keys to the vehicle, I noticed the evaluating look he directed at my navy blue dress, clearly considering me out of place in that pretentious environment. "Smile," Mom ordered Michael between his teeth as we crossed the carved wooden doors. "The Montgomerys are here, and I want to introduce you." I understood then the true purpose of this evening. The Montgomerys, an influential family in the local real estate sector with whom Michael had been looking to close a deal for months. I was simply a prop and accessory in his theater of a devoted son taking care of his elderly mother. Rage boiled inside me, but I maintained the composure learned during years of facing classrooms full of restless teenagers. The maitre d' led us to a table near the fireplace where a middle-aged couple was waiting. The man with graying hair and an impeccable suit stood up seeing us approach. The woman with a pearl necklace that seemed to weigh more than her thin neck sketched a practiced smile. Robert Claudia let me introduce my mother. Emily Carter announced Michael with a pride so fake it almost caused me a bitter laugh. She was a literature professor for 4 decades. "A pleasure," replied Robert Montgomery, shaking my hand. "Michael speaks wonders of you constantly." Another lie. Michael barely mentioned my existence except to complain about my stubbornness or to use me as an excuse when it suited him. I sat in silence, aware of Claudia's curious look on my inflamed lip that the makeup barely disguised. "What happened to you there?" she asked bluntly, pointing to my mouth with a gesture of her wine glass. I felt Michael's immediate tension beside me, his body rigid, anticipating my response. Linda intervened with practiced speed. "My mother-in-law tripped this afternoon on a small table. At her age, balance begins to fail. Isn't that right?" Her eyes dared me to contradict her. 40 years teaching literature had provided me with ample knowledge about crucial moments in narratives about turning points where characters reveal their true nature. This was mine. "Actually," I replied, pausing, savoring each word like the verses of a particularly significant poem. "It was a domestic accident. But do not worry, I am perfectly fine." I saw the momentary relief in Michael's eyes, believing I would play his game. Little did he know that that would be the last time I would hold back the truth to protect his image. The scene passed like a badly written play, forced conversations, excessive laughter at barely funny comments, and me playing the role of proud mother, while the humiliation from hours before throbbed in my wounded lip. Robert Montgomery explained with exaggerated enthusiasm a tourism development project on the west side of the lake, while Michael nodded with calculated admiration. "The only obstacle is some old properties whose owners refuse to sell," commented Montgomery between bites of steak. "Older people who do not understand the real value of their assets, nor the progress we are bringing to the region." "My mother had the same attitude with her apartment," intervened Michael, shooting me a significant look. "Fortunately, she has come to her senses, and we are finalizing the paperwork for an advantageous sale, right, Mom?" I felt all eyes converging on me. The lie floated in the air, waiting for my confirmation. I had never agreed to sell my home. I had never signed any document despite their increasingly aggressive insistence. "I am considering all options," I replied diplomatically, raising the glass of water to my lips to gain a few seconds. "At my age, important decisions require reflection." Michael's frowned brow anticipated another confrontation later. Under the table, I felt Linda's hand pinch my thigh, secretly a silent reminder of my vulnerability. I held back the impulse to get up and leave that theater of the absurd, aware that I needed to keep up appearances a little longer if I wanted to execute the plan that was beginning to form in my mind. "My mother-in-law is always so prudent," intervened Linda, with fake sweetness. "But we have already found a charming apartment near ours, much more suitable for someone in her situation." Her situation, asked Claudia, with poorly disguised curiosity. At 67, living alone in such a big apartment, explained Linda with a condescending tone. Domestic accidents are just the beginning. Last week she forgot to turn off the stove. Another blatant lie. My mind worked with the same sharpness as when I dictated classes on the complexities of Hemingway or Faulkner. I had never forgotten to turn off an appliance, and they knew it. They were gradually building a narrative of senile incompetence to justify the control they intended to exert over my assets. "That is worrying," commented Robert, exchanging looks with his wife. "Very worrying," agreed Michael with fake distress. "But as an only child, it is my responsibility to take care of her." Only child. The most painful lie of all. Philip, my second son, existed somewhere in Spain, pushed away by years of manipulation, where Michael gradually convinced him of my supposed favoritism, of imaginary preferences, of fabricated slights. The letters I sent for years were intercepted, the calls blocked. To Philip, I was the mother who had abandoned him emotionally. To Michael's social world, Philip simply did not exist. While dessert was served an elaborate creation of chocolate and berries that I barely touched my mind, analyzed every detail of the abusive pattern I had tolerated for too long. It was not just the recent blow, it was a systematic strategy of isolation, manipulation, and control that had advanced silently for years, like a silent disease that is only detected when it is already advanced. "Do you not like the dessert?" Mrs. Carter asked Claudia, noting my distraction. "It is delicious. I lied with the diplomacy acquired in decades of school meetings. I am just a little tired." "Age does not forgive," commented Linda with a poisonous smile. "She gets fatigued more easily every time. That is why we insist on the change of housing." The conversation drifted towards trivial anecdotes while I watched the distorted reflection of my face in the dessert spoon. The respected professor, the educator who had inspired generations of students, reduced now to a problematic old woman whose will was an inconvenience for her son's ambitious plans. At the end of the evening, during the silent ride back to my apartment, I made an unshakable decision. That public humiliation would be the last. The blow on my mouth, still throbbing under the makeup, would not remain unpunished, nor become the first of a series. My professor's mind, accustomed to analyzing great works of literature, would now design my own story of liberation. When the car stopped in front of the Lakeview building, Michael turned off the engine and turned towards me with a severe expression. "I hope you understood the importance of cooperating, Mom." He pronounced each word like someone speaking to a difficult child. "The Montgomerys are crucial for my future." "I understand perfectly, son." I replied with a calm that seemed to disconcert him. "More than you imagine." "Tomorrow the real estate agent will come with the final papers," added Linda from the passenger seat. "I hope we do not have another unpleasant scene." "There will be no scene," I assured, opening the vehicle door. "Good night." Closing the door behind me, I saw the expression of surprise on their faces. They expected resistance tears, perhaps even pleas. My serenity was more disturbing than any confrontation. In the solitude of my apartment, I observed carefully every corner of this space. They had tried to snatch from me the walls covered with bookshelves, filled with underlined volumes, the framed photographs of my student groups over the years, the armchair where Frank used to read the newspaper every Sunday. This was not simply a property, it was the physical archive of my existence. I walked slowly towards the landline I rarely used, preferred over the mobile Michael had given me, and which I suspected he used to monitor my conversations. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago when the first signs of control began to manifest. "Martha." I said when my neighbor and friend of decades answered, "I need your help, it has happened." Martha Robinson, a widow like me, and former history teacher, understood immediately. For months we had discussed the possibility of this moment preparing for a scenario we hoped would never arrive. "I am coming over," she replied without needing more explanations. While I waited, I changed my formal dress for comfortable clothes and went to the bathroom to remove the makeup hiding the evidence of the blow. The mirror revealed the reddish mark beginning to acquire purple tones. Carefully, I took my mobile phone and photographed the wound from different angles, making sure the lighting clearly revealed the nature of the damage. The bell rang 15 minutes later. Martha entered hurriedly, panting slightly after climbing the stairs from her apartment on the lower floor. Her expression changed, seeing my face now clean of makeup. "My God, Emily," she whispered, approaching to examine my injured lip. "Was it Michael?" I nodded, feeling for the first time the full emotional weight of what happened. The tears I had held back for hours finally overflowed my eyes. He hit me because I refused to sell the apartment. I explained between sobs, shaking my body. Then they took me to dinner with some business partners as if nothing had happened. Linda laughed when it happened, Martha. She laughed. My friend hugged me tightly, her indignation palpable in the stiffness of her shoulders. When we separated, her determined expression reflected my own. "It is time to execute the plan," she declared firmly. "We cannot let this escalate." During the next 30 minutes, we meticulously reviewed the steps we had outlined months ago when the first signs of Michael's controlling behavior became undeniable. Martha had been my confidant since I detected altered documents among those they tried to make me sign, since I noticed small sums disappearing from my bank accounts, since I perceived how they systematically pushed away my friends. Tomorrow early, we will visit Dr. Williams to document the injury medically indicated Martha, consulting the list we had previously made. Then directly to Victoria Edwards' office. Victoria, a lawyer specializing in the rights of the elderly, had been a student of mine 20 years ago. I remembered her brilliance, her commitment to justice that transcended the pages of the books we analyzed in class. "We also need to contact," Philip Thorne added, thinking of my younger son pushed away by his brother's manipulations. "It is time he knows the truth." That night I barely slept. My lip throbbed with a pain that transcended the physical, reminding me with every beat of the deepest betrayal that can exist. That of the son who swore to protect you and ends up becoming your aggressor. Martha insisted on staying occupying the guest room that used to belong to Philip. Her presence comforted me, but we both knew it was a temporary solution. The true battle was just beginning. Dawn found me preparing coffee in the kitchen, watching the early light draw silhouettes on the mountains seen from my window. This view, this small daily pleasure they also wanted to take from me. For the first time in months, I felt the fog of confusion they had created around me dissipate, revealing with crystal clarity the systematic manipulation to which they had subjected me. "Good morning," greeted Martha, entering the kitchen in her floral robe. "How is your lip?" "It hurts less than my pride," I replied, pouring coffee into 2 ceramic mugs I had acquired on a trip years ago. "But the pain reminds me why we must act now." At 8 o'clock sharp, we were in the waiting room of Dr. George Williams' office, a respected doctor who had been treating my blood pressure problems for years. The doctor, a man with kind eyes and gentle hands, barely contained his indignation examining my wound. "This is not a domestic accident, Emily," he affirmed, while meticulously photographing my lip from different angles. The shape of the bruise clearly indicates an impact with human knuckles. "Are you ready to file a formal complaint?" I nodded determination, crystallizing inside me like a diamond formed under immense pressure. The doctor elaborated a detailed report using precise medical terms, documenting not only the recent wound, but also my impeccable medical history. Contradicting the allegations of cognitive deterioration Michael had begun to spread among acquaintances. "I will keep a copy in my personal file," assured Williams, handing me the sealed envelope, "in case they try to alter your official history. It would not be the first time I see relatives manipulating medical documentation to control assets of the elderly." With a medical report in my bag, Martha and I took a taxi towards downtown, our next stop. The elegant building where Victoria Edwards lived had her law firm specialized in elder law. Getting out of the vehicle, I noticed my hands trembling slightly. It was not fear, it was the anticipation of a radical change in my life. The receptionist, a young woman with thick-rimmed glasses, indicated for us to wait a few minutes. I observed the office walls decorated with diplomas and recognitions. Among them, I distinguished a framed photograph of Victoria's graduation 20 years ago. I appeared next to her, both smiling at the promise of a brilliant future she had fully honored. Professor Carter Victoria's warm voice interrupted my reminiscences. I looked up to meet my former student, now a 45-year-old woman with an impeccable suit and the same determined shine in her eyes I remembered from her university days. Or should I say Emily, after so many years? Victoria, I replied, getting up to greet her. Her expression changed immediately, noticing my injured lip. Please come into my office. She indicated with a professional tone that barely hid her concern. During the next hour, I recounted every detail of what happened. The blow, the humiliating scene, but also the systematic campaign of isolation that had preceded the physical incident. I explained how they had gradually limited my social contacts, monitored my calls, tried to control my finances under the pretext of helping me. Victoria listened attentively, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking incisive questions, revealing her deep understanding of the pattern of abuse against the elderly. What you describe is a textbook case of economic and psychological violence that has escalated to physical violence, she explained, when I finished my story. Unfortunately, I see similar cases with increasing frequency. The good news is that we have legal tools to protect you. She unfolded before us a structured plan of action. First, a restraining order against Michael and Linda. Second, forensic review of my bank accounts to detect possible misappropriations. Third, invalidation of any document I might have signed under duress in recent months. We also need to locate Philip, pointed out Victoria, reviewing her notes. A testimony from him about how Michael deliberately kept him away from you would greatly strengthen our case. It has been years since I had real contact with him. I admitted feeling a pang of pain that exceeded that of my injured lip. Michael made him believe I rejected him, intercepted my letters, blocked my calls. I have contacts in Europe who can help us locate him, offered Victoria. Meanwhile, we need to meticulously document every interaction with Michael and Linda. Any call visit or message must be recorded. Leaving Victoria's office, I felt a contradictory mix of emotions, the weight of facing my own son, but also a strange feeling of liberation, finally recognizing the abusive nature of our relationship. For too long, I had normalized unacceptable behaviors, justifying them with excuses of work stress or misunderstandings on my part. "What will you do when Michael shows up this afternoon with the real estate agent?" asked Martha as we walked to the bus stop. "I will follow Victoria's advice, keep calm, sign absolutely nothing, and discreetly record the entire conversation," I replied, touching the small recording device the lawyer had provided me. Direct confrontation would only make things worse at this moment. Back in my apartment, Martha helped me organize important documents that had to be protected: deeds, bank statements, will medical records. We digitized them and sent encrypted copies to the secure email Victoria had provided. We also prepared a small suitcase with essentials, in case I needed to leave my home temporarily due to any escalation of violence. "You should stay with me for a few days," suggested Martha as we sorted family photographs documenting the relationship with my children over the years at least, until the restraining order is in effect. "No, Martha," I replied firmly, holding an image where Philip, barely 5 years old, smiled, riding on his father's shoulders. "If I leave now, I would be ceding control over my home. Besides, I need to be here when the real estate agent arrives." The bell rang promptly at 4 in the afternoon. Martha withdrew discreetly to the guest room, prepared to intervene if necessary. I activated the recorder hidden in my vest pocket and opened the door with a neutral expression. Michael was there, accompanied by a man in a gray suit and briefcase, whom I assumed was the real estate agent. To my surprise, Linda was not with them. "Mom meets Stephen Moore from Alpine Properties," announced Michael with a falsely jovial tone. His eyes deliberately avoided my injured lip. He comes with the final documents for the sale. "Good afternoon," Mrs. Carter greeted the agent, shaking my hand with a rehearsed smile. "Your son has told me a lot about you." I invited them in with a mechanical courtesy, indicating they take a seat in the living room. I offered coffee, which Michael rejected with impatience, while the agent accepted politely. "Let's get to the point," interrupted Michael while I served the coffee. "The buyer is anxious to close the deal, and we need your signature today." The agent extracted several documents from his briefcase, spreading them on the coffee table. I noticed immediately that some already had marks indicating where I should sign without giving me time to read them carefully. "Could you explain exactly what I am signing, Mr. Moore?" I asked, with the calm I had perfected during decades of control in noisy classrooms. "Of course," replied the agent, slightly disconcerted by my question. "This is the purchase agreement for your condo. This other document authorizes the direct transfer of the money to a joint account with your son to facilitate management. And this last one is the rental contract for your new home at Pineview Care Home." Pineview Care Home. I repeated, faking confusion. "I thought we had talked about an apartment near yours, Michael." My son shifted uncomfortably in the armchair. "The real estate market is very dynamic, Mom. This is the best option currently available." A quick internet search days before had revealed to me that Pineview Care Home was not the apartment building they had described, but a nursing home on the outskirts of the city, known for its questionable conditions. I would like to read the documents carefully before signing. I declared taking the papers to consult them with my lawyer. "Your lawyer?" Michael's voice went up an octave, betraying his surprise. "I did not know you had a lawyer." "There are many things you do not know about me lately, son," I replied with a smile that did not reach my eyes. Age has not made me incompetent, only more cautious. The real estate agent seemed increasingly uncomfortable, alternating looks between my swollen lip and Michael's growing agitation. "Mrs. Carter, these documents were already reviewed by your son's lawyer, who represents family interests," intervened the agent with a conciliatory tone. "Everything is in legal order. Still, I insist on reviewing them personally." I maintained my position while taking a sip of coffee. Haste is never a good counselor in asset matters. Michael slammed his fist on the table, startling the real estate agent. The coffee in my cup spilled slightly onto the saucer. "Enough excuses, Mom," he exploded with the same threatening tone that had preceded the blow the day before. "Either you sign now, or I will take other measures." "What kind of measures?" Michael, I asked, keeping my voice deliberately calm, aware of the recorder in my pocket. The kind that left my lip like this yesterday. The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. The real estate agent stared at my wound, suddenly understanding the situation he was in. I think we should reschedule this meeting," stammered Stephen Moore, hurriedly gathering the documents. "When we are all calmer." "Do not move," ordered Michael to the agent before turning to me with burning eyes. "You are inventing things. You fell yesterday. Everyone knows it." "Dr. Williams' medical report indicates otherwise," I replied, without altering my tone, as well as the photographs taken immediately after the incident. The guest room door opened and Martha appeared on the threshold, her unexpected presence adding another level of bewilderment for Michael. "Mr. Moore." I addressed the agent, who seemed anxious to escape that situation. "I suggest you consult with your legal department before continuing to participate in this transaction. You could be facilitating a case of elder abuse and misappropriation of assets." The real estate agent paled, visibly looking at Michael as if seeing him for the first time. "I need to verify some details with the office," he murmured, getting up hurriedly. "I will contact you soon." Michael remained seated while the agent withdrew his face, a mask of barely contained fury. When the door closed behind Stephen Moore, he got up slowly, his figure projecting a threatening shadow over me. "You have no idea what you have done." He pronounced each word with a calm, more terrifying than any scream. "I thought I would make things easy for you, Mom, but I see you prefer the hard way. The only way I see is that of truth and justice." I replied, holding his gaze. And that is never really the hardest in the long run. I hope you enjoy your little victory. He smiled coldly, heading towards the door, because it will be the last. When he left, the silence in the apartment seemed to hum with residual tension. Martha approached, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "That was close," she commented while I deactivated the recorder. "For a moment, I thought he would assault you again." "He would not do it with witnesses present," I replied mentally, reviewing every moment of the confrontation. "Michael is calculating, not impulsive. Yesterday's blow was not a momentary loss of control. It was a deliberate decision to intimidate me." We sent the recording to Victoria immediately. Her response came in minutes. We had enough to request an urgent restraining order. She also informed me that her contacts in Europe had located Philip in Barcelona, where he worked as a computer engineer, and had left a message asking him to contact her. "Do you think Philip will answer?" asked Martha while we prepared a light dinner. "I do not know," I confessed, feeling the old wound of his absence. 3 years have passed since our last real contact. Michael has had plenty of time to completely poison our relationship. That night, trying to fall asleep, I reflected on how I had reached this situation. The signs were always there. The gradual control over my finances, the excessive worries about my health, the progressive social isolation, the manipulation to distance me from Philip. As a literature teacher, I had analyzed countless plots where characters fell into traps evident to readers but invisible to their protagonists. The irony of becoming one of those characters was not lost on me. The phone rang at 7 the next morning. Victoria's voice sounded energized despite the early hour. "We have important news, Emily," she announced without preamble. "Philip has responded. He wants to talk to you today, and there is more. Judge Davis has agreed to issue a provisional restraining order against Michael and Linda while we thoroughly investigate the case. For the first time in months, I felt the balance beginning to tip towards justice. The silent plan we had put in motion was bearing its first fruits, germinating a seed of hope in the arid soil of abuse and manipulation. My lips still hurt, but now that pain had transformed into a reminder of my own strength, not my vulnerability. The video call with Philip was scheduled for 11 in the morning. While I waited in front of my computer screen, a gift he had sent me from Barcelona 3 Christmases ago, I felt a lump in my throat. How would he react seeing my injured lip? Would he believe my version or the lies Michael had planted in his mind for years? The sound of the incoming call interrupted my thoughts. I breathed deeply and accepted the connection. The face of my youngest son appeared on the screen thinner than I remembered, with a short beard he did not have in our last communication and eyes reflecting painful caution. "Mom," he greeted with a contained voice, a mix of formality and repressed emotion. Philip the furry replied, feeling my voice break slightly. "What a joy to see you." There was a moment of awkward silence. His eyes stopped on my injured lip, but he commented nothing about it. Instead, he went straight to the main issue. "Attorney Edwards contacted me yesterday. He explained adjusting his glasses, a nervous gesture he kept from adolescence. She told me disturbing things about Michael. During the next hour, I meticulously dismantled the web of lies Michael had woven between us. I showed him the letters I had written regularly never sent because my eldest son intercepted them. I told him how gradually Michael had taken control of my communications, claiming I was confused or overloaded by technology. Philip listened with an increasingly somber expression, occasionally asking precise questions, revealing his analytical engineer mind. "Why didn't you look for me by other means?" He asked finally with a tone that was not accusatory, but genuinely bewildered. I tried. I replied, feeling the weight of those lost years. "I wrote to your university address, but by then Michael had already convinced everyone that I was developing cognitive problems. My messages probably seemed to confirm his claims." I showed him the recent medical report certifying my full mental capacity, contradicting frontally the narrative of deterioration Michael had built so carefully. When I finally told him the incident of the blow, I saw how his face transformed. The initial caution gave way to a visceral indignation I recognized immediately. It was the exact expression of his father when facing an injustice. "I will take the first available flight home," he declared, with a determination that admitted no reply. "This ends now. Fill up your job." "My job can wait," he interrupted firmly. 3 years have been lost by his manipulations. We will not lose one more day. After the call renewed, energy ran through my body. The reconnection with Philip acted as a balm for wounds I had believed permanent. Martha, who had waited discreetly in another room during the conversation, appeared with a hopeful smile. "By your expression, I deduce it went well." She commented, serving tea in 2 cups better than I expected. I admitted feeling for the first time in months that justice was possible. "Philip will be here in 2 days." Victoria visited us that afternoon to inform us that the restraining order had been officially issued. Michael and Linda had to stay a minimum of 100 yards from me, my home, and places I usually frequented. An investigation had also been initiated into possible financial irregularities in my accounts. "It is a good start," explained Victoria, spreading documents on the table. "But we need to go further. What happened with you is not an isolated case, Emily. I have been investigating and discovered something alarming. Michael and Linda have been involved in at least 3 similar cases in the last 2 years." "What? How is it possible?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Through the charity foundation, they run Golden Sunset, supposedly offering support to elderly people without family, but in reality identifying vulnerable people with significant assets. Victoria unfolded before us a folder with photographs, press clippings, and legal documents. In them, Michael and Linda appeared smiling next to elderly people at various social events. The dates and names were carefully noted. Carmen Suarez, 78 years old, transferred her house to the foundation 6 months before passing away in natural circumstances. Stephen Miller, 81 years old, modified his will, leaving his art collection to the foundation a week before being committed for sudden dementia. Jane Ferreira, 75 years old, sold her family ranch below market price to a company linked to Michael. The pattern was undeniable and terrifying. My own son had developed a system to systematically take advantage of vulnerable elderly people, and I was nothing more than his next target. "This changes our strategy," declared Victoria, putting away the documents. "It is no longer just about protecting you, Emily. We have the opportunity to dismantle an entire criminal operation." "What do you propose exactly?" asked Martha while I tried to process the magnitude of what we had just discovered. "A trap," replied Victoria with a determined shine in her eyes, using Emily as an apparent cooperative victim to document the entire fraudulent process from within. The proposal was as bold as it was dangerous. Pretend I was giving in to the pressure, apparently agree to their demands, while meticulously documenting every step of the fraudulent process. With irrefutable evidence, not only could we protect my assets, but also get justice for other past victims and prevent future abuses. "It is risky," admitted Victoria, "but we have advantages they do not know about. The restraining order giving us time to prepare Philip's return, and most importantly, they completely underestimate your capacity." Emily, that night, while contemplating the starry sky from my balcony, I made a decision. Decades teaching literature had shown me that great stories of justice require courage and cunning in equal parts. The time had come to write my own chapter of resistance. The next 2 days passed in intense preparations. Teresa Fisher, a social worker specialized in elderly cases, joined our team to advise us on security protocols and documentation. Dr. Williams provided additional medical reports certifying my full mental state, contradicting frontally any future allegation of incapacity. We discreetly installed security cameras in my apartment, especially in areas where important conversations could take place. Philip arrived promptly as promised, his face showing the fatigue of the long transatlantic flight, but with unbreakable determination. The hug we shared at the airport healed wounds I thought permanent. "You are exactly as I remembered you," he commented, examining my face with eyes shining with contained tears. Except for this, he added gently, grazing my lip already in the process of healing. Physical wounds heal fast, I replied, squeezing his hand. It is the others that leave lasting marks. Back in my apartment, Philip carefully studied every document, every recording, every photograph. His technical training proved invaluable to organize the evidence chronologically and ensure its legal validity. What they have done is systematic, he concluded after reviewing all the material. They are not impulsive outbursts. It is a calculated strategy they have perfected with other victims. That is why we must be equally methodical in our response, intervened Victoria, who had met with us to finalize details of the plan. The trap must be perfect. The strategy was defined in its minimum details. I would contact Michael, simulating regret for my stubborn behavior, suggesting I was reconsidering the sale of the apartment. Meanwhile, Philip would discreetly investigate the complete network of associates involved in the fraudulent scheme of the Golden Sunset Foundation. Teresa would establish contact with relatives of previous victims to build a stronger collective case. The key is in the timing, explained Victoria, reviewing the schedule we had made. We need Michael and Linda to feel safe, to believe they have absolute control, so they reveal completely their intentions and methods. The next morning, following the agreed plan, I made the call to Michael from a new phone that Victoria had provided specifically for this purpose. Michael. His voice sounded cautious, clearly surprised by my initiative to contact him after the restraining order. "Son," I replied with a voice deliberately fragile, as if I were on the verge of tears. "I think things have gotten out of control. I have been thinking a lot, and maybe you are right about the apartment." "Wow." His tone changed instantly to a calculatingly pleased one. "I'm glad you have reconsidered, but you know there is a restraining order." "A misunderstanding," I interrupted with feigned shame. "I was upset that day, but I have already contacted the lawyer to withdraw it." There was a brief silence. I could almost imagine Michael calculating his next moves, evaluating the authenticity of my apparent surrender. "That is very sensible of you, Mom," he finally replied with fake warmth. "I have always said that deep down you are a reasonable woman. I just want peace, son." "I am tired of conflicts," I added, playing the role of vulnerable old woman I had written specially for this occasion. We agreed to meet 3 days later in neutral territory, the cafe of the Summit Community Center, where I used to volunteer. Michael agreed, clearly pleased with what he perceived as an easy victory. When I hung up, the small group gathered in my living room exchanged looks of cautious satisfaction. The first step was taken. "He has taken the bait," commented Philip, tension evident in his shoulders. "Now comes the most delicate part," warned Victoria. "We must maintain the farce long enough to document the entire process, but without putting you at real risk, Emily." The next 3 days passed in intense preparations. I met with forensic psychologist Ana Gutierrez, who advised me on techniques to project vulnerability and confusion without overacting. Philip installed discrete microphones in my clothes and configured a system to transmit in real time to a surveillance team that would be positioned strategically in the cafe. Victoria prepared falsified documents that seemed to gradually cede control of my assets, designed specifically to motivate Michael to reveal the full extent of his intentions. The morning of the meeting, while preparing in front of the mirror, I observed with strange fascination the reflection returning my gaze. My lip had healed almost completely, but something fundamental had changed in my expression. The initial indignation had matured into a serene determination that was paradoxically more powerful. I was no longer a victim seeking justice. I was a hunter tending an elaborate trap. "Ready?" asked Philip, discreetly adjusting the small microphone hidden in the brooch, adorning my blouse. More than ever, I replied with a smile that had nothing to do with the fragility I had to project hours later. The Summit Community Center buzzed with the usual mid-morning activity when I arrived deliberately 10 minutes before the agreed time. I chose a table in the corner we had selected previously private enough for a confidential conversation, but with a perfect angle for the locals' security cameras. Michael appeared promptly alone, a detail we had not anticipated. I assumed Linda's absence was strategic. Her presence could remind me of her cruel laughter during the incident of the blow. "Mom," he greeted, leaning to kiss my cheek, as if nothing had happened between us. I noticed his look, quickly evaluating my appearance, calculating my emotional state. "Michael," I replied with a soft voice, adopting a slightly hunched posture, interpreting with precision the role of a defeated old woman. "Thank you for coming. I always have time for you," he replied with that fake warmth he had perfected over the years. "I am glad you have reconsidered our conversation." During the next 20 minutes, I meticulously executed my part of the plan. I expressed confusion about recent events. I suggested that perhaps I had misinterpreted his intentions and showed concern about becoming a burden to him. Every phrase had been carefully rehearsed with the team, designed to feed his false sense of control, while gradually insinuating my willingness to consider selling the apartment. "I only want the best for you," affirmed Michael, covering my hand with his in a calculatingly affectionate gesture. "Pineview Care Home has excellent facilities, and you would be well taken care of while we handle all the administrative complications of your assets." "I suppose you are right," I replied, looking into my cup of tea with feigned resignation. At my age, these financial worries become overwhelming. Exactly. His barely contained enthusiasm was revealing. "In fact, I have been thinking we could expand our agreement to include the management of your investments. I have some excellent contacts through the foundation who could maximize your returns." There it was, the first mention of the Golden Sunset Foundation, the hook we needed him to bite. "Your foundation. You have never told me much about it," I commented with feigned innocence, offering him the opportunity to elaborate. Michael proceeded to explain with growing enthusiasm how the foundation helped elderly people without family manage their assets efficiently. Every word was meticulously recorded by the hidden microphones, every expression captured by the locals' cameras. "We have several success stories," he explained, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm. Now that he believed he had me completely convinced. Mrs. Carmen Suarez, for example, lived alone in a huge mansion she could barely maintain. We managed the sale, relocated her to a comfortable residence, and now her assets generate returns, ensuring her lifelong care. He omitted mentioning, of course, that Carmen had died mysteriously 6 months later with the foundation as the main beneficiary of her modified will. Our conversation continued for almost 2 hours. Gradually, Michael revealed more details about his operation, names of collaborators, usual procedures, and even insinuated methods to speed up the transfer of assets, evading legal requirements. Every revelation was another nail in the legal coffin we were meticulously building. Saying goodbye, we agreed to meet again the following week with the real estate agent and a trusted notary, Michael suggested. His expression leaving was of absolute satisfaction. The predator who believes he has his prey, cornered not suspecting he walks directly into a trap. I returned to my apartment where the complete team waited anxiously. The collective relief seeing me enter was palpable. "It was perfect," declared Victoria after preliminarily reviewing the recordings. He revealed enough incriminating information to justify a wider formal investigation. The way he spoke about other victims, commented Philip with barely contained disgust, as if they were simply successful commercial transactions. "The important thing is we have what we needed," intervened Teresa Fisher, reviewing her notes. Now phase 2 of the plan begins. That night, while the others withdrew to continue working on different aspects of the strategy, I remained alone on my balcony, contemplating the lights of the city extending towards the lake. The trap was set every gear working to perfection. Michael believed he had absolute control exactly as we had planned, but this time it would be me laughing at the end. The following week passed in a meticulously choreographed dance. Every movement, every communication with Michael was part of a greater plan unfolding with the precision of a Swiss watch. Victoria had secured the covert collaboration of a prosecutor specialized in economic crimes, impressed by the preliminary evidence we had collected. Philip, using his computer skills, had managed to access digital records documenting suspicious transfers from the accounts of previous victims to shell companies linked to Michael and Linda. "It is bigger than we imagined," explained my son, spreading complex diagrams on my kitchen table. His eyes showed a mix of indignation and professional amazement at the sophistication of the scheme. They have been operating systematically for almost 5 years with branches in 3 different states. Teresa Fisher had established contact with relatives of previous victims, discovering disturbingly similar patterns, previously lucid elderly people who suddenly developed confusion, inexplicable will modifications, and asset transfers, always benefiting directly or indirectly the Golden Sunset Foundation. My role in this elaborate scenario consisted of maintaining the facade of vulnerability and submission. 2 more phone calls with Michael, carefully monitored and recorded, reinforced his false sense of security. In every conversation, I showed greater willingness to cede control of my assets, faking a growing emotional dependence on him. "I just want to be calm in my last years, son," I told him in our last phone communication, adding a slight tremor to my voice. "I trust you will know how to manage everything better than me." "Of course, Mom." He replied with that condescension that was now transparent to me like crystal. "I have always had your best interests in mind." The decisive meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday in my apartment. Michael insisted on this place, arguing I would feel more comfortable in my own space to sign the documents. In reality, we suspected he preferred a private environment away from possible external witnesses. The preparations for that day were exhaustive. Technicians hired by Victoria discreetly installed additional cameras and microphones in my living room, creating an infallible surveillance system. Dr. Williams prepared an updated medical report certifying my full mental capacity, a frontal contradiction to the narrative Michael had built about my supposed cognitive deterioration. A support team, including 2 plainclothes police officers, would position themselves strategically in neighboring apartments, ready to intervene at any sign of danger. The night before the meeting, while reviewing the final details of the plan, Martha expressed her concern. "What if Michael suspects something? If he perceives it is a trap?" "We've considered it," replied Victoria with calculated calm. "That is why we have multiple layers of security and backup. But honestly, arrogance is his weak point. He is so convinced of his superiority he does not conceive the possibility of being manipulated." Philip nodded, adding narcissists like him are predictable in their unpredictability. His ego does not allow him to imagine that anyone, especially a confused old woman, could outsmart him. That night, I slept surprisingly well with the tranquility of one who has found clarity after the storm. My last reflection before closing my eyes was for Frank, my late husband. "Tomorrow justice will be done, my love." I whispered to his photograph on the nightstand, not only for me, but for all those who could not defend themselves. Wednesday morning dawned with an extraordinarily clear sky, as if nature itself wanted to witness clearly the events about to unfold. I dressed carefully in an outfit selected specifically for the occasion, a skirt and blouse in muted tones, reinforcing the image of fragility I needed to project, complemented with the brooch hiding one of the main microphones. At 10 o'clock sharp, the building intercom announced Michael's arrival. He was accompanied as expected by Stephen Moore, the real estate agent, and by an unknown man I assumed was the trusted notary mentioned previously. To my surprise, Linda was also part of the group, a detail not contemplated in our predictions. "Activating full protocol," whispered Philip, who would leave the apartment through the back door to join the surveillance team on the upper floor. "Do not be nervous, Mom. We are with you at every moment." "I am not nervous," I replied with genuine serenity. "I am ready." When I opened the door, Michael's practiced smile received me like a poorly adjusted mask. He wore a dark formal suit clearly selected to project authority on this occasion. He considered his definitive victory. "Mom, you look so good," he greeted with fake warmth, kissing my cheek as if no violence existed between us. "Let me introduce you to Alejandro Quintana, public notary, who will assist us today." The notary, a middle-aged man with an impassive expression, shook my hand briefly. His evaluating eyes ran over my figure, probably looking for signs of the confusion Michael would have mentioned previously. "A pleasure, Mrs. Carter," he greeted with distant professionalism. Linda, for her part, barely disguised her impatience examining my apartment with that calculating look I already knew too well. Her heels clicked on the wooden floor as she headed directly to my living room without waiting for an invitation. "Beautiful day to make important decisions, right, Emily?" she commented with that fake sweetness making my stomach turn. I invited them to take a seat in the living room, where a tray with coffee and cookies waited prepared meticulously to maintain the appearance of domestic normality. Every cup, every plate, every napkin had been placed strategically, not to interfere with the angles of the hidden cameras. Before beginning, intervened the notary, spreading several documents on the table. "I must verify that Mrs. Carter fully understands the nature of the agreements she will sign today." "Of course she understands," replied Michael with barely contained impatience. "We have discussed this extensively, right, Mom?" I nodded with a deliberately docile expression, interpreting to perfection the role of submissive old woman we had rehearsed. The notary proceeded to explain in general terms the documents, intentionally using complex technical language that would be confusing for anyone without legal training. "This first document transfers the ownership of the property to Alpine Investments, retaining a life estate for you," he explained, pointing to pages full of clauses in small print. "The second establishes a trust for the management of your investments with your son as main administrator and secondary beneficiary." What the notary omitted mentioning, and which we had discovered thanks to Philip's investigation, was that Alpine Investments was a shell company, indirectly controlled by Michael, and the trust included clauses allowing my accounts to be emptied in a matter of weeks. "It sounds complicated." I commented, faking confusion watching the documents. "They are standard procedures, Mom," intervened Michael with a condescending tone, placing a pen in my hand. "Trust me, it is the best for everyone." It was at that precise moment Linda made the mistake we were waiting for. Impatient to conclude the process, she leaned towards her husband and murmured in a low voice, but perfectly audible to the microphones, "Hurry her up before she changes her mind like old lady Ferreira. Jane Ferreira, the old woman who had sold her family ranch below market price, only to die mysteriously 2 months later." The name we needed them to mention explicitly linking previous cases with my current situation. "Excuse me," I said then, getting up slowly. "I need a moment. My blood pressure medication. I will accompany you." Mom offered Michael, immediately clearly worried about leaving me alone in such a critical moment. "It is not necessary, son," I replied with a reassuring smile. "I know my own house." I headed towards the hallway where Philip had installed a small intercom hidden behind a painting. The agreed signal, 3 soft taps on the wall. The confirmation we had the necessary evidence to proceed with the final phase. Returning to the living room, I noticed Linda had taken advantage of my absence to examine my belongings more closely. Her fingers ran over the frame of a family photograph with that barely disguised greed she had shown from the beginning. "What a charming photograph," she commented with fake admiration. "Is it your late husband? What a shame he is not here to advise you in these important moments." The mention of Frank was like a signal. The moment had arrived. I sat down again, took the pen Michael offered me with growing impatience, and stared at the documents in front of me. Before signing, I said with a voice surprising everyone with its sudden firmness, "I have a question, son." "What question?" Mom replied. Michael, impatience barely contained in his tone. "Did you plan for me to end up like Carmen Suarez and Jane Ferreira?" A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Michael's expression, transforming from bewilderment to panic, was almost cinematic. Linda stood motionless, her hand still on the photo frame. The notary, clearly confused, looked alternatively at each person present. "I do not know what you are talking about," stammered Michael, partially recovering composure. "The medication must be confusing you again." "I am perfectly lucid," I replied, getting up slowly. Lucid enough to understand that the Golden Sunset Foundation is nothing more than a facade to scam vulnerable elderly people. Enough to record every incriminating word you have pronounced in the last few weeks. Enough to set a trap you have bitten completely. The main door opened at that moment, making way for Victoria Edwards, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. Through the side door appeared Philip along with Teresa Fisher and a man I recognized as Prosecutor Ramirez. Michael Carter and Linda Sotomayor pronounced formally, "One of the officers, you are under arrest for crimes of aggravated fraud, extortion, falsification of public and private documents, and elder abuse." What followed was controlled chaos. Linda exploded in a hysterical crisis, accusing alternatively Michael of being the mastermind of everything and me of manipulating the situation. The notary, pale as paper, tried to explain he simply provided professional services without knowledge of the irregularities. Michael, for his part, maintained a stony silence while officers recited his rights and proceeded to handcuff him. "This does not end here, Mom," he murmured, passing by me escorted by police. "You are 67 years old. I have a whole life ahead." The difference, I replied, holding his gaze firmly, is that my years I will live in freedom. Yours have a less promising future. When the door closed behind them, a strange silence invaded my apartment. The space seemed simultaneously emptier and more mine than ever. Philip approached, surrounding me with a protective hug contrasting with his still tense expression. "It is over, Mom," he whispered against my hair. "We did it. But I knew it had not really ended. It was just the beginning of a complex legal process, extending for months, perhaps years. Testimonies, hearings, possible trials. The evidence was overwhelming, but the judicial system had its own rhythms and labyrinths. "It is not the end," I replied, separating gently to look at each person in the room. My recovered son, my loyal friend, the brilliant lawyer, the committed social worker. It is the beginning of something different, something important. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal and media activity. The case attracted public attention, especially when the investigation revealed the full extent of the fraudulent network operated by Michael and Linda. Other victims and relatives began to come forward, confirming identical patterns of manipulation and abuse. The Golden Sunset Foundation was judicially intervened, its accounts frozen, its files minutely examined by forensic auditors. A month after the arrests, while having coffee with Martha on my balcony, contemplating the lake, an idea began to crystallize in my mind. "You know what is most painful about all this?" I commented, watching the steam rising from my cup. "It is not the personal betrayal, it is knowing there are so many elderly people in vulnerable situations without the tools or support to defend themselves." "You have been thinking about that a lot lately, haven't you?" replied Martha, who knew me too well. "I have been thinking about transforming this experience into something constructive," I admitted. "What if we used part of the compensation I will eventually receive to create a true foundation, one that really protects the elderly from the kind of abuse I suffered?" The idea gained shape and substance during the following weeks. Philip, who had decided to stay indefinitely in the country, contributed his technical vision to create early warning and monitoring systems. Victoria offered pro bono legal advice. Teresa Fisher got excited about the possibility of developing specialized intervention protocols. 3 months after that decisive Wednesday, while Michael and Linda awaited trial in preventive detention, we officially registered the Sunrise Foundation for the Elderly, our first case. A 73-year-old lady whose nephews tried to declare incompetent through fraudulent medical certificates. The day of the official inauguration of our small office downtown, I contemplated the diverse group of people gathered there. Committed professionals, enthusiastic volunteers, dignified elderly people. My gaze stopped on a framed photograph we had hung on the main wall. Frank and I on our 40th anniversary, smiling with the accumulated wisdom of shared decades. "He would be proud," commented Philip, following the direction of my gaze, "of your courage, of your resilience, of how you transformed something so painful into a project helping so many." I replied, observing the small crowd celebrating this new beginning during decades. I taught my students about literary characters, finding redemption through suffering, transforming pain into purpose. I never imagined at 67 I would become the protagonist of my own story of transformation. The scar on my lip had disappeared almost completely, but its invisible trace remained as a reminder. Sometimes the most painful wounds lead us to the most necessary paths. The blow Michael gave me that afternoon not only broke the last thread of respect between us, it also shattered the invisible chains, keeping me captive in a relationship based on manipulation and fear. A toast proposed Victoria, approaching with glasses of champagne for our small founding group. To new beginnings, suggested Teresa, raising her glass. To justice, added Philip, determination shining in his eyes. To dignity at every stage of life, I completed feeling finally the fragmented pieces of my existence, finding a new order, more authentic and powerful than the previous one. While the sun began its descent over the lake, dyeing the sky golden and violet hues, I understood with absolute clarity. My story did not end with a punch in the mouth, nor with the arrest of my son. It continued with every elderly person we would protect, with every family we would guide, with every abuser we would stop. At 67, when many consider life begins to close, I had discovered a new chapter, a new mission, and this time I held firmly the pen, writing every page. My life changed forever that afternoon when I felt the metallic taste of blood in my mouth after the blow from my own son. At 67, I never imagined the man I carried in my womb would be capable of such violence, nor that his wife Linda would laugh at my humiliation. But that moment of darkness paradoxically became the catalyst for my liberation. For decades, I was a literature professor, analyzing with my students great stories of transformation and justice. I never thought I would become the protagonist of my own narrative of empowerment. The punch Michael gave me before taking me to dinner at the Highland Stag marked the end of a relationship based on manipulation and the beginning of my resistance. As I have told you, that blow was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a systematic process of abuse. The gradual isolation from my friends, the progressive control of my finances, the lies to distance me from my younger son Philip, and the careful construction of a narrative about my supposed mental incapacity. Everything was part of a larger scheme operated through his Golden Sunset Foundation, victimizing vulnerable elderly people to appropriate their assets. The decision to face this situation was not easy. It required courage to recognize the abuse, cunning to document it, and determination to execute a meticulous plan. With the invaluable help of my friend, Martha attorney, Victoria Edwards social worker Teresa Fisher, and my son Philip recovered after years of artificial separation. We built a perfect trap to expose not only my particular case, but the entire criminal network Michael and Linda had established. I feigned submission, appeared confused, allowed them to believe they had absolute control while every incriminating word was carefully documented. Justice arrived that decisive Wednesday when, surrounded by authorities and committed professionals, I confronted my abusers directly. Seeing Michael handcuffed, finally understanding he had been outsmarted at his own game, was a victory not only personal, but collective. But my story did not end with his arrest. From the ashes of this painful experience, something luminous was born: the Sunrise Foundation for the Elderly, a genuine project dedicated to protecting and empowering elderly people in vulnerable situations. I transformed my pain into purpose, my humiliation into restored dignity, my silence into amplified voice for those who still cannot speak. Today, every time I receive a new elderly person in our foundation, I recognize in their eyes the same fear and confusion that once inhabited mine. Every time we successfully intervene in a case of abuse, I feel the blow I received was not in vain. It has acquired a transcendent meaning far exceeding the physical pain it caused me. If my story has resonated with you, if it has moved you, or perhaps even identified with some aspect of this experience, I ask you not to let it end here. The channel Elderly Stories exists precisely to give voice to stories like mine, real testimonies of people who have faced adversity and found unexpected paths towards redemption and justice. Subscribe right now to Elderly Stories. Each subscription is not simply a number in a statistic. It is a powerful declaration that these stories deserve to be told, heard, and amplified. It is your way of saying to other possible victims, you are not alone. We are here. We believe you. I also invite you to explore other videos on the channel where you will find equally powerful stories of overcoming and resistance. Some stories end like mine with tangible justice. Others represent ongoing struggles, testimonies of daily courage rarely receiving public recognition. All deserve your 5 minutes of attention. The comments you leave under each video are not words lost in the digital void. They are bridges built towards other people who might be living similar situations at this precise moment. Your experience, your reflections, even your questions can become the light guiding someone else towards their own liberation. What would you do in my situation? Do you know someone who might be facing similar abuse? What alarm signals did you identify in my story? Share your thoughts. Every like on our videos helps these stories reach more people, expanding the circle of awareness and support we are building. A simple click can literally save lives, increasing the visibility of these crucial testimonies. I must be transparent with you. Keeping this channel active, producing quality content, respecting the dignity of every story shared requires resources. If our work seems valuable to you, if you believe in the importance of these narratives, consider supporting us through Thanks. This function allows small donations, helping us cover production costs, research, and in some cases, direct support to people bravely sharing their experiences with us. Your contribution through Thanks allows us to continue bringing daily content, expanding our reach to more communities, and developing educational resources for elder abuse prevention. It is not an exaggeration to say every dollar donated translates directly into protection for vulnerable people. When I decided to share my story publicly, I did it with a clear objective: that no other person had to clean blood from their lips in solitude and shame as I did that afternoon. That no other elderly person had to choose between dignity and security, between assets and family love. From what part of the world are you watching us? Have you witnessed similar situations in your environment? I invite you to share your local reality in the comments. Abuse against the elderly knows no geographic borders, but its specific manifestations and potential solutions can vary significantly between different cultural contexts. This video required weeks of preparation. Reliving these moments was not easy for me, but every minute invested was worth it if my experience can light the path for others. Your act of sharing this content exponentially multiplies that positive impact, bringing awareness to circles that otherwise would remain in darkness. At 67, I have discovered life can offer new beginnings when you least expect it. That justice, although sometimes slow, eventually finds its way. That the voice of an older person can resonate with enough force to shake the foundations of deeply rooted abusive systems. The next time you see an elderly person, remember behind those wrinkles exists a complete story, a life of experiences, struggles, and wisdom. That age should never be an excuse to diminish the inherent value of a person, nor justification to snatch their autonomy over their own existence. I thank you deeply for accompanying me in this painful but necessary story. If you have reached this point, you have already demonstrated empathy the world desperately needs. Now I ask you to transform that empathy into concrete action. Subscribe to Elderly Stories. Leave your comment, share this video with whoever might need it, and if it is within your possibilities, support us with a thanks. The punch I received that afternoon did not define me. What defines me is how I responded to it, how I transformed that violence into a movement of protection and dignification. I invite you to be part of this transformation, to join our community of resistance and hope. I, Emily Carter, extend my hand with the certainty that together we can build a world where aging with dignity is a guaranteed right, not a privilege to defend with punches. I wait for you in the next video of Elderly Stories, where we will continue giving voice to those society attempts to silence.